The crisp morning air nipped at Mike's cheeks as he made his way through the dense Michigan forest. The sun was just starting to peek through the trees, casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground. He'd been hunting in these woods for 20 years, and every season brought its own special magic. But today was different. There was something in the air he couldn't quite put his finger on. Mike had always been an early riser. That morning, he'd woken up at 4 a.m., pulled on his favorite worn-out hunting jacket, and grabbed his trusty thermos of black coffee. His wife had given him that thermos on their first anniversary, and it had been his loyal companion on every hunting trip since then. "Be careful out there," she'd mumbled sleepily as he kissed her goodbye, just like she did every time he went hunting. As he walked deeper into the forest, his boots crunched quietly against the fallen leaves. He knew these trails like the back of his hand, every twist, every turn, every hollow. The old oak tree with the lightning scar, the fallen log that looked like a sleeping bear, the creek that sang a different song each season, they were all old friends by now. Mike spotted fresh deer tracks in the soft earth and felt that familiar rush of excitement. He'd been tracking a particularly large buck for the past few days, and these tracks looked promising. Keeping his footsteps light and his breathing steady, he followed the trail, moving like a shadow through the undergrowth. The morning was peaceful, with only the occasional bird call breaking the silence. A family of squirrels scampered across his path, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker was hard at work. These were the moments Mike lived for, just him and nature, sharing secrets that city folks would never understand. But then something changed. The forest's rhythm shifted ever so slightly. At first, Mike thought it was just his imagination, but then he heard it again. A sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the usual rustling of leaves or the snap of a twig under a deer's hoof. No, this was different. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable, a whimper carried on the morning breeze. Mike froze, his hunter's instincts kicking in. He'd heard all sorts of sounds in these woods over the years, the cry of a fox, the hoot of an owl, even the occasional lost hiker's shout. But this sound, it tugged at something deep in his chest. It wasn't just a sound of the forest, it was a cry for help. He stood completely still, letting his ears guide him. The whimper came again, slightly stronger this time. It was coming from somewhere to his left, past the old berry bushes where his daughter used to pick strawberries when she was little. Mike checked his watch, 6:45 a.m. The sun was higher now, throwing dappled light through the canopy above. Slowly, carefully, he changed direction. The deer tracks were forgotten now, something more important needed his attention. As he moved through the underbrush, the sound grew clearer. It was definitely an animal, and it was definitely in distress. Years of experience had taught Mike when to pursue and when to hold back, but this time, something in his gut told him he needed to investigate. The forest grew thicker here, with brambles catching at his clothes as if trying to hold him back. But Mike pressed on, guided by that persistent whimpering. He could smell pine needles and damp earth, and something else, something that made his nose wrinkle. It was the musty smell of an animal that had been in one place too long. As he pushed through a particularly dense patch of undergrowth, the trees suddenly opened up into a small clearing. What he saw there made him stop dead in his tracks. His heart, which had been steady and calm all morning, suddenly started racing. There, in the middle of the clearing, stood an old oak tree, its massive trunk casting a long shadow in the morning light. And tied to that tree was something that would change the course of not just his day, but many lives forever. Mike had seen a lot of things in these woods over the years, beauty and tragedy, birth and death, the endless cycle of nature playing out season after season. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. As he took his first step into that clearing, he had no idea that this moment would become a story people would tell for years to come, a story about fate, courage, and the incredible bonds between living beings. The morning mist was just starting to lift, and the sun's rays filtered through the branches, illuminating the scene before him like a spotlight on nature's stage. What Mike saw next would leave him stunned, marking the beginning of an extraordinary tale that would touch the hearts of everyone who heard it. Mike's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer to the oak tree. The German Shepherd was larger than he'd first thought, though its ribs showed clearly through its matted fur. Despite its condition, there was something noble about the way it held itself, even tied to the tree. The rope around its neck was rough and weathered, the kind you might find in an old barn or garage, tied with hasty, awkward knots that spoke of panic or inexperience. The dog's eyes caught Mike's attention immediately. They weren't the frightened or aggressive eyes he'd expect from a trapped animal. They were alert, intelligent, and somehow pleading. The dog's tail gave a weak wag, thumping softly against the fallen leaves, and Mike felt his heart twist. He'd grown up with dogs all his life, but there was something different about this one, something that made his instincts scream that he was looking at more than just an abandoned pet. Around the base of the tree lay scattered evidence of human presence: a dirty plastic water bottle, empty food bowls crusted with dried mud, and what looked like it might have once been a blanket, now soaked through with morning dew. The scene told the story, but it wasn't the whole story. Not yet. As Mike carefully approached, speaking in low, soothing tones, the dog's behavior changed subtly. Its tail kept wagging, but there was a new tension in its body. It wasn't fear. No, it was almost like the dog was trying to tell him something. "Hey there, buddy," Mike whispered, keeping his voice gentle and steady. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The dog's ears perked up at his voice, and it made a soft whining sound, different from the whimpers that had first caught Mike's attention. Years of hunting had taught him to read animal behavior, and something about this didn't add up. The dog wasn't acting like a frightened, abandoned animal. If anything, it seemed protective. Moving slowly, Mike set down his hunting gear and pulled out his water bottle. The dog watched his every move with those intelligent eyes, accepting the water gratefully when Mike held it out. But even as it drank, its attention kept shifting to something behind the tree, and that's when Mike noticed the strange pattern in the fallen leaves on the ground, as if something or someone had been moving back and forth repeatedly. The morning sun had risen higher now, and the forest was coming alive with birdsong, but around this tree there was an unusual quiet. Mike had seen plenty of animals tied up by careless owners before. It was something that made his blood boil, but this felt different. The rope wasn't tied to restrain so much as to keep the dog in one specific place. But why? As he circled the tree slowly, his boots crunching softly on the frost-covered ground, Mike kept talking to the dog in that same gentle voice. "What's going on here, boy? What are you trying to tell me?" The dog's eyes followed his movement, and its whining grew more insistent. When Mike reached the far side of the massive oak, what he saw made him freeze mid-step. There, in a hollow formed by the tree's giant roots, partially hidden by fallen leaves and the morning shadows, was something that changed everything. The dog's strange behavior suddenly made perfect sense, and Mike understood with crystal clarity why those intelligent eyes had seemed so pleading, so urgent. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. The dog watched him intently, and in that moment, Mike saw something remarkable in its eyes: relief. As if it had been waiting, keeping its silent vigil, knowing that eventually someone would understand. The morning light filtered through the branches above, illuminating the scene like nature's spotlight, revealing a truth that would soon touch hearts across the country. The German shepherd let out another soft whine, but this time it sounded different, like a sigh of relief. All those hours, days perhaps, of waiting and watching, protecting and hoping, were about to end. Mike found himself blinking back unexpected tears as he dialed 911, his other hand reaching out to gently pat the dog's head. "You're a hero, aren't you?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been out here all this time, keeping watch, haven't you?" The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the usual morning sounds fading into the background as Mike reported his location to the emergency dispatcher. The dog's tail wagged again, stronger this time, as if it understood that help had finally arrived. The cool morning air carried the promise of change, of rescue, of a story that would soon capture imaginations and warm hearts across the nation. As Mike waited for help to arrive, he sat down next to the dog, offering comfort and companionship. The morning sun continued its climb into the sky, casting ever-changing patterns through the leaves above, while below, an extraordinary tale of loyalty and protection was about to unfold, one that would remind everyone who heard it about the incredible depths of a dog's devotion and the remarkable ways in which fate sometimes works. The sight that greeted Mike in the hollow of the old oak tree made his heart stop for a moment. There, curled up in what remained of a tattered blanket, was a small child. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 years old, his chest rising and falling with the shallow breaths of exhausted sleep. His dark hair was tangled with leaves, and his cheeks were smudged with dirt, but somehow, incredibly, he was alive. The German Shepherd's behavior now made perfect sense. All this time, the dog hadn't just been tied to a tree, it had been standing guard over this sleeping child, protecting him from the dangers of the wilderness. The empty food bowls scattered around suddenly told a different story. Someone had tried to help, perhaps, but hadn't returned. Through it all, this loyal dog had stayed, keeping its vigil, sharing its warmth, waiting for real help to arrive. Mike's hands shook as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid startling the child. "I need immediate assistance," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I've found a young boy, probably around 4, out here in the woods. He's with a dog. Yes, they both need medical attention. The dog's been protecting him." As he spoke, the child stirred slightly, and the German Shepherd's ears immediately perked up. The dog's eyes darted between Mike and the boy, as if making sure this newcomer wasn't a threat to its young charge. The morning sun filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows that danced across the scene, making it feel almost dreamlike. While waiting for emergency services, Mike carefully removed his hunting jacket and draped it over the sleeping child. The boy's clothes were damp from the morning dew, but thanks to the dog's body heat and what remained of the blanket, he wasn't as cold as he could have been. It was nothing short of a miracle, really. 3 nights in the Michigan wilderness would have been deadly for a child alone. The German Shepherd watched every move Mike made with those intelligent eyes, relaxing only when it became clear that Mike was trying to help. Now that Mike could see them both clearly, he noticed how the dog had positioned itself perfectly, close enough to share warmth with the boy, but also facing outward, ready to protect against any threats that might emerge from the forest. Time seemed to slow down as they waited for help to arrive. Mike kept talking softly, both to the dispatcher and to the dog, his mind racing with questions. How had they ended up here? Who had tied the dog to the tree, and why hadn't they come back? The forest around them continued its morning routine, birds calling, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath the old oak tree, the boy began to stir again, and this time his eyes flooded open. They were bright blue, confused at first, then widening with recognition as he saw the dog. His small hand reached out automatically to touch the animal's fur, a gesture that spoke of familiarity and trust. The dog responded with a gentle tail wag, leaning slightly closer to the child while keeping his protective stance. "Hey there, little buddy," Mike said softly, staying where he was to avoid frightening the child. "You're safe now. Help is on the way." The boy looked at Mike with those big blue eyes, not afraid but curious. Perhaps he was too exhausted to be scared, or maybe the dog's calm acceptance of Mike helped reassure him. "Max," the boy whispered, his voice hoarse from dehydration as he patted the dog's side. So the dog had a name, Max. It fit him somehow, this brave, loyal creature who had refused to abandon his young friend. Mike reached for his water bottle again, carefully helping the boy take small sips while Max watched approvingly. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder by the second. The cavalry was coming. The boy's eyes widened at the sound, and he pressed closer to Max, who remained steady and calm. Mike could hear vehicles approaching on the old Forest Service road and voices calling out. Help was nearly here. As the first responders made their way through the underbrush, Mike found himself reflecting on the incredible scene he'd stumbled upon. What were the odds that his morning hunt would lead him here, to this exact spot, at this exact moment? Some might call it coincidence, but sitting there in the growing morning light, watching Max stand guard over his young charge even as help approached, it felt more like destiny. The boy reached out and took Mike's hand, his small fingers cold but surprisingly strong. With his other hand still buried in Max's fur, he created a connection between all 3 of them, the lost child, the loyal dog, and the hunter who had found them. In that moment, as the first rescue workers appeared through the trees, Mike knew he was part of something extraordinary, a story of survival and devotion that would stay with him forever. The forest clearing quickly transformed into a hub of activity as emergency responders arrived. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees, casting strange shadows in the morning light. Paramedics worked with gentle efficiency, checking both the boy and Max, while police officers began their investigation. Mike stood nearby, still processing everything that had happened since he first heard that whimper in the woods. 3 days, the lead officer said, shaking his head in disbelief as he jotted notes in his pocket notebook. The boy's name is Tommy. His family has been camping at Pine Valley Campground, about 2 miles from here. The officer looked up at Max, who refused to leave Tommy's side even as the paramedics worked. They've been searching the wrong area entirely. Everyone thought they'd headed north toward the river. Mike watched as a paramedic wrapped Tommy in a warm blanket. The boy was alert now, sipping slowly from a water bottle, his other hand still tangled in Max's fur. Despite everything he'd been through, Tommy seemed remarkably calm, as if having Max by his side made everything okay. The dog's presence had a similar effect on the emergency workers. Everyone who came near seemed to pause for a moment, touched by the obvious bond between the child and his protector. The family reported both Tommy and Max missing at the same time, another officer explained, joining the conversation. They'd been hoping Max was with him, but nobody knew for sure. She paused, looking at the rope still tied to the tree. What we can't figure out is who tied the dog up and why they didn't report finding them. The investigation began to piece together a timeline. Tommy had wandered away from the campsite while his parents were setting up their tent. Max, ever watchful of his young friend, had followed. But instead of heading toward the river where the search teams were concentrating their efforts, Tommy had apparently walked in the opposite direction, deeper into the dense forest. One of the paramedics approached Mike with a puzzled expression. "The boy keeps talking about a man in a green jacket," she said. "Says the man gave them water and tied Max to the tree so they wouldn't get more lost. Then he said he was going to get help." She trailed off, looking at the empty water bottles and food bowls scattered around the tree. Mike surveyed the scene with a hunter's eye, noting details others might miss. There were boot prints in the soft earth, now partially obscured by the morning frost, signs that someone had indeed been here before him. "Looks like whoever it was tried to help," Mike said quietly. "Maybe they got turned around in the woods themselves. These forests can be tricky if you don't know them well." As they talked, a helicopter appeared overhead, its rotors thundering through the morning quiet. In its wake came news vans, already alerted to the remarkable story unfolding in the Michigan wilderness. The first news crew pushed through the underbrush just as Tommy was being prepared for transport to the hospital. Their cameras captured the moment when a paramedic tried to separate the boy from Max. "No," Tommy said firmly, his small voice somehow carrying over the helicopter noise. "Max stays." The German shepherd stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Tommy with unwavering devotion. The paramedic looked at her supervisor, who nodded after a moment's consideration. Sometimes rules needed to bend. Mike helped them load both Tommy and Max into the ambulance. As they worked, more details emerged from Tommy's scattered recollections. He remembered walking for a long time, following Max as it got darker. He remembered being scared, but feeling safe because Max was there. He remembered the man in the green jacket giving them water and tying Max to the tree, promising to return with help. The investigation would eventually reveal more about those 3 days, the extensive search efforts in the wrong location, the mysterious helper who never returned, the incredible luck that brought Mike to that specific clearing on this particular morning. But right now, watching the ambulance pull away with its unlikely pair of passengers, Mike felt a profound sense of having witnessed something extraordinary. As the emergency vehicles began to disperse and the news crews set up their equipment, Mike found himself drawn back to the old oak tree. He touched its rough bark, looking up at its spreading branches that had sheltered Tommy and Max through 3 cold nights. The empty food bowls and water bottles were being collected as evidence now, each item telling part of a story that seemed almost too remarkable to be true. A state police detective asked Mike to walk him through everything one more time, every detail, every observation, every moment from when he first heard the whimper to when help arrived. As Mike recounted the morning's events, he realized that this story would be told and retold, not just because of its happy ending, but because it spoke to something deeper about loyalty, courage, and the mysterious ways in which fate sometimes works. Over the next few days, as Tommy recovered in the hospital, the full story began to emerge like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Each new detail added depth to an already remarkable tale of survival and loyalty that had captured hearts across the country. Local news stations camped outside the hospital, eager to share updates on the boy who survived 3 nights in the wilderness thanks to his faithful dog. The truth, when it finally came together, was both simple and extraordinary. Tommy's parents had been setting up their campsite when he spotted a butterfly and followed it into the woods. Max, always protective of his young friend, had gone after him without hesitation. But the forest can be deceiving, turning familiar paths into mazes of trees and shadows, and soon both boy and dog were hopelessly lost. Hospital staff were amazed by Tommy's condition. Despite spending 3 nights in the wilderness, he was only mildly dehydrated and scratched. The doctors credited his survival to Max's constant presence. The German Shepherd had done more than just keep Tommy company. He had become a living blanket, sharing body heat through the cold nights and sheltering the boy from the wind and rain. "Max kept me warm," Tommy told the child psychologist who gently interviewed him about his experience. "When it rained, he got on top of me. When I was scared, he licked my face." The boy's simple words painted a picture of unwavering devotion that brought tears to the eyes of even the most seasoned hospital staff. The mystery of the man in the green jacket was solved when a local hiker came forward after seeing the news coverage. He had been walking an unfamiliar trail when he found Tommy and Max on their second day in the woods. Panicked and unsure of their location, he had given them his water and some trail mix, then tied Max to the tree to keep them in one spot while he went for help. But in his haste and unfamiliarity with the forest, he had become lost himself, eventually finding his way out miles from where he had started. "I've been sick with worry ever since," the hiker explained to the police, his voice shaking with emotion. "I tried to find my way back to them, but everything looked the same. I searched for hours until it got dark. By the time I found my way out, I was so turned around I couldn't even tell the search teams where to look." The guilt in his eyes was evident, but the police assured him that his actions had helped. By keeping Tommy and Max in one location, he had made it possible for Mike to find them. The investigation revealed even more remarkable details about Max's actions during those 3 days. Tracking experts, studying the patterns of disturbed leaves and dirt around the oak tree, discovered that Max had created a small perimeter around Tommy. Despite being tied to the tree, the dog had paced in circles as far as the rope would allow, effectively marking a territory that kept wild animals away from the sleeping child. Tommy's mother, speaking to reporters from the hospital room where she hadn't left her son's side since his rescue, shared another touching detail. "Max was the runt of his litter," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "When we chose him, everyone told us to pick a bigger, stronger dog. But Tommy loved him right away. They've been inseparable since the day we brought Max home. Now look what that little runt did. He saved our boy's life." The story touched something deep in people's hearts, perhaps because it reminded them of their own bonds with pets, or maybe because it showed that heroes come in all forms. Letters and gifts began arriving at the hospital from across the country. Children sent hand-drawn pictures of Max and Tommy. Dog rescue organizations shared the story as an example of the incredible loyalty of dogs. One local artist even offered to paint a portrait of Max to hang in the hospital's pediatric ward. The old oak tree, which had sheltered them through those 3 nights, became something of a local landmark. People started leaving small tokens there: dog toys, children's drawings, and thank you notes to Max. The Forest Service eventually had to put up a small fence to protect the tree's roots from all the foot traffic, as people came from miles around to see the place where such an extraordinary story of survival had unfolded. As for Max, the hospital made an unprecedented decision. Recognizing the therapeutic value of keeping the dog and boy together, they'd bent their rules and allowed Max to stay in Tommy's room during his recovery. The sight of the German Shepherd curled protectively on the bed beside his young friend became a symbol of hope and loyalty that moved everyone who witnessed it. In the quiet moments between the media interviews and medical checks, Mike would sit with Tommy and Max, marveling at how a normal morning hunt had led him to become part of such an incredible story. He watched as Max maintained his protective vigil, even in the safety of the hospital room, and thought about all the different kinds of courage in the world, from a child's bravery in the face of being lost, to a dog's unwavering loyalty, to a stranger's attempt to help even when unsure of the way. The days following Tommy's rescue brought a wave of amazement from the medical staff at City General Hospital. The doctors had prepared for the worst, After all, 3 nights in the Michigan wilderness should have left more severe marks on a 4-year-old boy. Instead, they found themselves documenting what they called the Max effect, how a loyal dog's protection had defied medical expectations. "It's remarkable," Dr. Wilson, the lead pediatrician, explained to the gathering of reporters outside the hospital. "Apart from mild dehydration and a few scratches, Tommy is in surprisingly good condition. The way Max positioned himself against the wind and rain, sharing body heat. It's as if the dog knew exactly what to do." The doctor paused, adjusting his glasses. "In my 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything quite like this." Inside Tommy's hospital room, the scene was touching. The staff had brought in a special bed so Max could stay close to his young friend. The German Shepherd had become something of a celebrity among the hospital workers, accepting gentle pats from nurses while never taking his eyes off Tommy for too long. One nurse even started bringing extra treats during her rounds, though she always asked Tommy's permission before giving them to Max. "The dog saved my baby," Tommy's mother would say again and again, her voice thick with emotion. "He didn't just keep him warm, he kept him calm." Tommy said he wasn't scared because Max was there. How do you thank someone for something like that? She would often sit for hours, watching her son sleep peacefully with Max curled protectively at his feet, just as they had been found under the old oak tree. The local community rallied around the story in remarkable ways. The pet store near the hospital sent over a huge basket of premium dog treats and new toys for Max. A local diner started offering the Hero's Breakfast, named after Max, and donating part of the proceeds to the local animal shelter. Children from nearby schools made get-well cards, many featuring drawings of a big dog protecting a small boy. But it was the reaction of the first responders that really showed how special this case was. The paramedics who had been first on the scene would stop by during their breaks, not just to check on Tommy, but to spend time with Max. One of them, a tough-looking veteran with 20 years on the job, was seen wiping his eyes after watching Max gently lick Tommy's hand during a medical check. "You see a lot in this job," the paramedic said quietly to Mike during one of his visits. "But sometimes you witness something that reminds you why you chose this work in the first place. That dog, he didn't just keep the boy alive. He gave him hope. You can't put a price on that kind of loyalty." The media attention grew as the story spread. News channels from across the country sent reporters to cover what they called the miracle in Michigan. But unlike many media sensations, this one seemed to bring out the best in people. The hospital had to set up a special room just to hold all the letters and packages that came pouring in, most of them addressed simply to Tommy and Max. Local dog trainers were amazed by Max's behavior during the ordeal. "What's extraordinary," one expert explained, "is how the dog adapted to the situation. When they were moving, Max led Tommy to shelter. When they were found, Max stayed calm and accepted help." This shows an incredible level of intelligence and emotional understanding. The hospital's child psychologist noted something else remarkable. Tommy showed none of the usual trauma symptoms expected after such an ordeal. "When children go through frightening experiences, we often see anxiety, nightmares, fear of separation," she explained. But Tommy processes it differently. In his mind, he was never alone because Max was there. That bond protected not just his body, but his spirit. As Tommy grew stronger, the hospital staff began preparing for his release. But they faced an unusual challenge: how to handle the crowd of well-wishers and reporters who had been camping outside the hospital. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mike, who had been visiting regularly, offered to help coordinate with local police to ensure a smooth and private departure for Tommy and his family. The story had changed something in the community's heart. The local animal shelter reported a surge in adoptions, with many families specifically asking about German Shepherds. The police K9 unit started a program allowing their dogs to visit children in the hospital, inspired by how Max's presence had aided Tommy's recovery. Even the gruff hospital administrator was seen sneaking treats to Max when he thought no one was watching. One evening, as the sun set outside Tommy's hospital window, Mike sat watching the boy and his dog. Tommy was playing with one of the many toys that well-wishers had sent, while Max lay beside him, alert but relaxed. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, it was hard to imagine what they had been through just days before. Yet the bond between them was stronger than ever, a living testament to the extraordinary power of love and loyalty. In the months that followed Tommy's rescue, the story continued to touch lives in unexpected ways. Mike found himself looking at the forest differently during his hunting trips. The woods were still the same peaceful sanctuary they'd always been, but now they held new meaning. Every old oak tree reminded him of that fateful morning, and he often found himself pausing to remember the incredible scene he'd discovered. The experience changed Mike's relationship with the outdoors in profound ways. While he still enjoyed hunting, he began spending more time working with local search and rescue teams, sharing his knowledge of the forest's hidden trails and natural landmarks. His experience finding Tommy and Max had shown him how valuable a hunter's tracking skills could be in emergency situations. The forest speaks to you if you know how to listen, Mike would tell the new rescue volunteers during training sessions. That morning, if I hadn't stopped to listen to that faint whimper, if I hadn't trusted my instincts, he would always pause here, remembering how close he'd come to walking past that clearing, following those deer tracks instead. Tommy's family became close friends with Mike, often inviting him over for Sunday dinners. Max would always greet him with special enthusiasm, as if remembering that morning when help finally arrived. The dog had become even more protective of Tommy, if that was possible, though in a gentle, watchful way that made everyone smile. "Watch this," Tommy's father would say proudly, showing visitors how Max would position himself between Tommy and any perceived danger, even something as simple as a too-hot cup of cocoa on the coffee table. The bond between boy and dog had grown even stronger through their shared experience, creating a connection that amazed everyone who witnessed it. The old oak tree in the forest became something more than just a landmark. The local community came together to create a small memorial there, nothing fancy, just a simple plaque that told the story of a dog's loyalty and a hunter's keen ears. The Forest Service even added the location to their maps, marking it as Max's Watch at the community's request. On warm weekends, Mike would sometimes take Tommy and Max back to the forest, teaching the boy about nature's signs and signals. Max would trot along beside them, no longer tied to any tree but staying close nonetheless. These trips became valuable lessons not just in outdoor safety, but in the deep bonds that can form between humans and animals. "See those tracks?" Mike would say, pointing to marks in the soft earth. "That's how I found my way to you that morning." Tommy would study the ground intently, while Max stood guard nearby, ever watchful. The forest that had once nearly claimed the boy's life was now becoming a place of learning and healing, thanks to Mike's gentle guidance. The local veterinary clinic started a new program inspired by Max's story, offering free training sessions to help dog owners better understand their pets' protective instincts. What Max did wasn't just instinct, the head veterinarian would explain. It was love in its purest form. He didn't just stay with Tommy, he problem-solved, he adapted, he protected. That's something special. Tommy's mother found herself speaking at local schools about outdoor safety, always with Max by her side. The German Shepherd would sit patiently through each presentation, his presence adding weight to her words about the importance of being prepared and the value of loyal companions. Children would crowd around after each talk, eager to pet the hero dog, while Max gently accepted their attention with dignified patience. The media interest eventually died down, but the impact of the story continued to ripple through the community. The local animal shelter named their new wing the Max Memorial Adoption Center and reported that stories of Max's loyalty helped countless dogs find new homes. "People come in looking for their own Max," the shelter director said. "What they find is that every dog has that potential for loyalty and love. It just needs the right human to bring it out." Mike's hunting jacket, the one he draped over Tommy that morning, hung in a special place in his home now. He'd retired it from active use, preserving it as a reminder of that extraordinary day. Sometimes, when friends would ask about it, he'd share the story again, but most locals knew it by heart. 1 year after the rescue, the community organized a special celebration. They gathered at the old oak tree, now surrounded by a simple wooden fence to protect its roots. Tommy, now 5.5, stood proudly next to Max, who had grown a bit grayer but remained as devoted as ever. Mike stood nearby, watching as Tommy's father unveiled a new addition to the memorial plaque. To the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog, the new inscription read, "And to the hunter who'd followed his heart instead of the tracks that morning." Mike felt his eyes grow misty as he read the words, remembering that cold morning when a whimper in the woods led him to something extraordinary. The story of Tommy, Max, and the hunter who found them became more than just a tale of survival. It became a reminder of the incredible connections that can form between humans and animals, of the importance of trusting our instincts, and of the unexpected ways that fate sometimes works. In the years that followed, whenever someone would ask Mike about the framed newspaper article hanging in his den, he would smile and say, "Let me tell you about the morning I went looking for deer and found something much more precious instead."